the proposal is very strange. It is an infringement of the rights of shareholders. If you look at the Principle 23 of the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018, it states clearly that their particular provision is all about the protection of the rights of shareholders. And the only reason why shareholders buy shares in any company is basically to earn dividend. So if a third party is now trying to expropriate what belongs to shareholders, that definitely is contrary to the rights of shareholders. Apart from the provisions of the Code of Corporate Governance, it's also contrary to the provision of the Constitution. The Constitution provides and gives every individual the right to property. So when government is now saying that they will expropriate what belongs to individuals, that is the shareholders, that is contrary to the rights of every shareholder in Nigeria, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. And that is why it is of concern to us at the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria.
Okay, well, Mr. Oguye, there's a legal angle to this. So the federal government is going through this, or going about this through a law, the finance bill, basically saying that, well, if there's a law backing this, what stops us from pursuing it?
Well, first and foremost, let me say that our country is going through rough economic times, and everybody appreciates this. And so, government is scrambling, looking for ways and means to keep hands meet, resorting to perpetual borrowing from far-flung places in the world, although the world is now a global village, resorting to domestic borrowing, external borrowing, etc., etc. Pension fund and all that. And now we have this proposal to fund the budget. Now, if Nigeria were to be in a state of war, although Nigeria is in a state of war with Boko Haram and all that, but if Nigeria were to be in a state of pervasive war, government could resort to extraordinary measures in a state of emergency to do certain things. For example, for a war effort, government could have requisition of the citizenry. People could be made to give up their houses to be used for barracks, vehicles to be used to convey troops and all that and all that. But that's not the situation here. So companies have shares, and people buy these shares in the capital market system, and these shares are to, attract dividends. There's a procedure and process for the payment of dividends. And so if dividends are unclaimed, I think that government should be supremely interested in how these dividends will be claimed, because that's the justice of the matter. There are many reasons why dividends are unclaimed. There could be share value depreciation, and people just feel, oh, what am I going to gain from that? There could be debts, there could be identification of shareholders' problems, etc., etc., and all that. Government should be interested from the point of view of justice delivery to ensure that shareholders ultimately are giving justice, not for government to feel that right. If we can't identify these people, and companies may eventually be using this money, why can't we take the money off those companies so that we can use the money ourselves? That's expropriatory, and that's against the provisions.
But is government saying we're taking the money off? It sounds as though the government is saying, well, we're managing this money for the shareholders or those who haven't claimed their dividends, and eventually it will be plowed back. So is this like government taking it?
Government is taking plow back to who? If somebody, for example, has 5,000 value of share, 10,000, and we have the agglomeration of it in totality. This money now amounts to up to is hitting 200 billion, and so government takes this money. The Office of the Attorney General of the Federation and all the other bureaucrats will now manage this money in the so-called trust fund to use this money to fund government needs and all that. So if eventually those solitary shareholders want to take this money back. Can you imagine the red tape and the bureaucratic stone wall that will be constructed against these individuals? Who will have to travel to Abuja, for example, to go and access these 5,000, 10,000 worth of shares? My take is that the regime that's in place could be built on, and that regime is, using multiple resources, the ICT resource, to identify shareholders and then ensure that ultimately they get these resources. There are records. There may be a number of reasons why people have not come up to take their shares. There are speculations that, during the first era of the indigenization decree, 1972, 1977, there were people who were being divested, foreigners, who are using cooks, gardeners as shareholders, just to ensure that they comply with the law, and that thereafter they are also doing the privatization exercise. A lot of people who are also doing that. If that was truly the case, government could approach that from the angle of mechanism of enforcing the law, meaning that if those steps were actually taken, that would mean that there was an infraction somewhere, that you had an illicit process. So you could identify those via the investigation, and your justice delivery system could then target those specific shares and then approach the court and say, forfeit these shares to the federal government in a normal way that you will enforce economic and financial crimes. But to then say, this category of shares, these dividends are not being claimed, so we're going to use it because we have an exigency or an emergency. It doesn't make good economic sense to me, and it doesn't make good justice sense to me. I'm not an economist, I'm a lawyer, that's obvious, but I'm saying that it doesn't meet the justice of the matter. You have to look, generally, an anchor. Because we don't treat the living very well in this country, sometimes we think that the dead or the presumed dead do not deserve justice. There's some of these people who bought shares in their names, were late, and therefore cannot present themselves to claim dividends. So I give you another example. Even the banking system, people die, they have, a little amount in their account, 100,000 in the salary account, 200,000, and they didn't plan to die. They didn't know that they were going to die. And when they want to access that money from the banks, they are then told to go and obtain a letter of administration. To obtain a letter of administration in Lagos, for example, the cost may well exceed the amount, and people then abandon those accounts.
Which also leads me to the issue of dormant accounts, because that's also, it's like in the mix, unclaimed dividends as well as dormant accounts. Mr. Ayeko, as of 2013, the value of dormant accounts was put in the region of 1 trillion naira. And our 2018 report says it had increased by 28%, and they are still there. What should happen? Because right now it would seem like the dormant accounts, as you heard Mr. Boye said, some of the account owners are late, some can never be claimed again. What should happen? I mean, would you then fault government's position if these things, remain unclaimed and unused?
Let's go back to the unclaimed dividend, because that is the focus of the finance bill. Before I answer that for the banks, what makes it absolutely unfair in terms of the intention of the government regarding the expropriation, the planned expropriation of unclaimed dividend, that this particular profit we are talking about, the government has collected 30% as corporate tax. In addition to that, they've collected 2% as education tax. In addition to that, also they've collected 10% withholding tax on this profit. So in total, government has collected 42% of the profit that is available for declaration as dividend. Now government is saying the remaining 58%, we also should have interest in it. And the question is this: do they have any investment in these shares? No. on what they do not have any investment, they've collected 42%. That is unfair. Yes, we know we have problems with unclaimed dividend in Nigeria. Why we are surprised as an institute is that you should go through the provision of the Finance Bill 2020. There is no mention of any attempt or any plan by the government on how to address the problem. And the expectation is that when there is a problem, you look for solution. For example, you do not expect a father of a child that has been diagnosed to be having yellow fever to be looking for grave digger. What they should be looking for is the solution. What are the reasons why people are not claiming their dividends? And there is this wrong impression out there that the unclaimed dividends are abandoned funds or they are ownerless. That is not true. The majority of those who have interest in this unclaimed dividend are alive, or those who are dead, their dependents are alive. But the system is so chaotic, so exploitative, unfair, and it is being handled in such a way that people are just frustrated. For example, Mr. Bill2020 mentioned something about the probate, and you can do a research. Visit any of the probate registry in any state of the federation. You will discover that no less than 60% of the applications we have there, they also include shares of deceased. So if you aggregate all the applications for letters of administration probate in all the probate registries in Nigeria, you will discover that substantial number of those applications are to enable them have access to the unclaimed dividends of these people. But if you go there, it's so bureaucratic in the sense that they ask, for example, since you need to process the application once, it will include the shares, it will include the property. Now, almost all the states, what they adopt is that you have to pay, whoever is processing, we need to pay 10% of the value of the assets to the government. For example, you talk about the value of a property that is included. Here is a shareholder who has died suddenly, who did not expect that he would die, and then you are asking the dependents, even for them to continue to use the house that the dependent left behind, the deceased left behind, that they need to pay 10% to the government. They cannot afford it. And in the process, the government now comes up with very arbitrary valuation procedure, in which they look at the property and they say it's worth 1 million naira. The question is this: are the dependents selling this property? They're not selling it, just a change of name, but the government has made it so complex. And when, if you look at some states, they also have maybe assumed value of property in certain locations. Now, the question is this: if you ask the government to pay for this particular assumed valuation, would they be able to pay? And in the process, there is compromise, there is corruption in the system, and because of that, a lot of people will abandon their claim.
This will seem a lot like Mr. Eku, that there is a lot of legal jungles, so to speak, for people to